Gosh, man, this book, Name of the Wind, is the most badly criticized book I've ever seen. Like, there are few books out there after I read that I don't agree with the general criticism of these books. Case in point, I really think this book, first of all, is badly criticized. Again, criticism is subjective. And my actually disagreement of this particular criticism I will tell you about is actually also subjective. And the reason why I have it is because if you actually read the story, you will notice that this particular criticism is very strange and very odd. First of all, this criticism is that Kvothe, the main protagonist in The Name of the Wind, is actually a Mary Sue. You don't even have to read most of the book in order to actually come across evidence that is contrary to this criticism. Again, every criticism is subjective, and my criticism of this criticism is also subjective. And the reason why I think this is the case is because in the beginning of the story, when Kvothe starts telling his story to the chronicler. Yes, when Kvothe starts telling his story to the chronicler, we're introduced to the Edmaruth, and they are basically traveling nomadic group of storytellers and musicians. And, you know, technically speaking, quickly what ends up happening is that his parents get killed. His parents are murdered by a mysterious group of people while he's away. He spends so much time in the forest alone by himself, and he has one thing to remind him of his parents, the parents he has lost. And it's a flute, and even that flute starts breaking down. And then he goes to the city, Tarbian, I believe. And what happens in that city when he goes there is that he becomes a homeless child. There's only a few salvations along the way. If you really read this story, the more you read, the more obstacles for Kvothe to overcome. Agarius too is a character, a male Mary Sue, that doesn't have any real obstacles to do. And the reason why people call Kvothe a Mary Sue is primarily because he's so good at everything. But people like that exist. There are a lot of people out there who are exceptionally good at everything. And you have to understand, even though Kvothe is a genius and is extremely talented, they exist. What ends up happening in the story is that obstacle after obstacle, even when he goes to the university. I don't like this example, but when he goes to the university, I say that because I technically hate the university section in the book. But even when he goes to the university, he goes there so that he can find more information on the nameless, the Jandarians who have killed his parents. Okay? And when he goes to the Arcanum, technically speaking, Ambrose sets him up and he breaks the laws. He brings a candle inside, and that is not allowed, okay, for obvious reasons. And technically speaking, he never ever achieves his task at the university. He never achieves his tasks, and he has to overcome a lot of obstacles. And I think this criticism of Kvothe being a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu is actually not a good criticism in the first book, Name of the Wind. It is a good criticism in The Wise Man's Fear, because Kvothe just goes away from the university and he seems to excel in everything he does. I just wanted to get that across. I think the character of Kvothe in the first book is very well written. But for this review, I want to do something different. About a month ago, I made a commitment to you. I made a commitment to you that I will try to not be selfish. I will try to examine what the author was trying to achieve when they were writing the book, because so many people, when they review the book, it's all about themselves. But let's talk about, for instance, Brandon Sanderson. His prose, when he talks, like his writing style, I prefer stylized writing style over minimalistic, right? But with Brandon Sanderson, from the get-go, from the beginning, he is trying to achieve a minimalist, invisible writing style that does not, interfere with the story. But guess what? What he's trying to achieve from the beginning is not good in my eyes. So I have judged Brandon Sanderson for years for having bad prose. But I never actually considered what Brandon Sanderson was trying to achieve. So for years, I was blind. For years, I was technically a fool, because this guy does such a remarkable job. I didn't notice any style, because he was trying to not have a style, okay? He was trying to have a simple, minimalist prose, and he does achieve this remarkably well. And therefore, his prose is actually good. Okay, and I want to do something like that. I don't really want to be an asshole, basically. I will have clips of Patrick Rothfuss stating what he wanted to achieve with this book, and I will examine him based on how he achieves those tasks. But before that, I will actually talk about the subjective thing, right? Because this is a review by me. I will tell you what I thought of the book, right? To start this part of the review, I will start with a very weird proposition. And this proposition is that the character of Ambrose, the bully in the university, is the greatest mistake in this book. Let me explain what I'm talking about. The university section in the story, in the Name of the Wind, and this is the part where Ambrose is actually prominent, and this is where Ambrose is the villain. Well, guess what? I actually abhor that part of the story. I abhor the university section of the story, because we have to examine how Patrick Rothfuss hooked me, right? So there are two main things in this story that hooked me. In the beginning of the story, we're introduced to Kvothe, and Kvothe is a broken man, and he used to be a great hero. And he starts telling his story to the chronicler, okay? And guess what? With the chronicler, I said it right this time. With the chronicler, we're going to find out, you know, Kvothe telling his story, how he got to here. Kvothe's parents get killed. The Edmund, they get massacred by the Nameless, and they massacre them with like blue fire, which is kind of a magic, right? And it's devastating. And technically speaking, what ends up happening is that Kvothe goes from there. His flute breaks down. He goes to a city, Tarbian, and in there he hears rumors. He hears rumors about a storyteller called Scarpi. And Scarpi is basically trying to tell a story about the Chandarians, the people who have killed his parents, okay? And there's this bit of a nice discovery here. And this discovery is that, okay, so a lot of people know some stuff about the Chandarians, but the Chandarians, the Nameless, they kill. This is a very crucial discovery. They kill people who know more than the normal. This is why his father got killed, because with the help of his mother, he was trying to write a song, and this song was going to be some sort of a masterpiece. And this particular song likely contained a very important truth about who they are and what they want and what they do. You have to understand, Patrick Rothfuss hooked me with these two things: who the Nameless are and what happened to Kvothe. Now let's talk about the university. When he goes there, he goes to the university to find out what actually happened and who the Nameless are. From my perspective, initially when the university section was starting out and when Kvothe was taking the test, and he was trying to get some sort of a scholarship, in that particular section I was very excited for the university, because the university seemed like the perfect logical step to tell the story, because the story so far, it's like, ooh, who are the Nameless? Who are these people who have killed his parents? And anyone who knows too much about them gets killed. What the heck? With this university section, I was expecting immediately when Kvothe goes in, he will look for, Arcanum, and he will try to go into the library and try to find the information. And I expected, this information will lead him away from the university, because there's not much conflict in the university. That's the crucial thing you have to understand. This is why Ambrose is a great mistake in this book. Because what happened is that the moment Ambrose was introduced in the university section, suddenly the university became more than just a place to learn more about the mystery. Because imagine if there was no Ambrose. Patrick Rothfuss will be forced to actually have more clues about the mystery and then keep the story focused, keep the story needled forward, right? And then we would go and we would have Kvothe leave the university and do something more interesting. Perhaps as was foreshadowed, what would happen is that, Kvothe would join someone else to fight the Nameless, right? And that's much more interesting than taking lessons in the university and trying to pay his tuition fees. And with the introduction of Ambrose, what ended up happening is that suddenly there was more conflict in the university. And the story could actually stay in the university and it would not be boring. There would be conflict with between Ambrose and Kvothe. And this is very bad, because it's not as interesting as finding more information about the Nameless. Number two, I was actually hooked by the Nameless, not Ambrose. So do you see why I think Ambrose is a great mistake in this book? If Ambrose did not exist, okay? If Ambrose did not exist, what would have happened was that Patrick Rothfuss would have been forced to move the story forward and to actually take Kvothe out of the university, and that way Kvothe might join some group of people who are also hunting the nameless, right? In fact, the university is a waste of time because he could have learned anything he learns in the university outside with real action. And this would have been way more interesting. I'm sorry, man. I completely disagree with you if you say, Ambrose is interesting because eventually he teaches, or at least he forces Kvothe to use the name of the wind, because that's not a good excuse for having such a bad character. Number two, for having a character that actually gives the university more purpose than it needs to have. And so that is my biggest criticism of this book. My biggest criticism of this book is Ambrose. If Ambrose is removed, suddenly you have a much better story that is more focused and is going somewhere. And because of that, I have to remove 1 star from the overall rating for this book because of this mistake, because of Ambrose, because of the university, because of how unfocused and because of how sort of meanderish it is. Meanderish, is that a word? I don't know, I have no clue. So after all of that shenanigans in the university, Kvothe finally gets a rumor that takes him toward this village called Trebon, and in that village there is some rumors that the nameless are there, and they're sort of attacking that village. And when he arrives there, he learns that there's been a wedding, and in this particular wedding it was burned with blue fire. Blue fire is magic which was used to kill his parents, and so he deduces this has to do a lot with the people who killed my parents. And technically speaking, the story progresses from there. So finally, things are back to track. Things are back to the reason why I kept reading in the beginning, which was who are the nameless and what happened to Kvothe. Because I speculated in the beginning, as I was reading the story, that actually these nameless people might have a lot more to do with Kvothe having become nobody, in the beginning of the story. So that was sort of a speculation that went nowhere.
So, unfortunately, if you read a fantasy novel a day for about 8 years, you realize pretty quickly that a lot of it is really the same. And when I was 14, you had an elf, had a dragon, magic sword, hey, I'm happy, that's great. But eventually I would get to the point where I'd pick up the book and I'd be like, hey, new fantasy book, and have I read this before? Well, I kind of had. It was very samey, and so I wanted to do something a little bit different.
And this is actually something I got a lot of the story, where the fantasy in this book is very unique. The dragons, for instance, toward the end of the story, Kvothe fights a dragon, and this particular dragon, we see him eat rocks in trees. And why is he eating rocks? To help with digestion. Like, I've never seen that in a fantasy. Like, no one talks about dragons beyond just, they're fire-breathing monsters that eat you. The Edamaruth, the Kvothe barons and the troop they are part of, the troop they're leading in the beginning of the story, those people are nomadic travelers. They don't have a country, and that is not something I have seen in fantasy before. And they are storytellers and musicians, right? And then there are the magic systems. The magic system in this story, actually, there's more than one magic system, and they are all unique, except sympathy. Sympathy has been done quite a lot. It has been done in Dresden Files. It has been actually done in folklore, in religions, but naming is unique, and it is really fun to actually consider what you can do with it. Then there is the reason why I think this book is extremely unique, and it's the voice. A lot of fantasy authors skip on their voice, and they don't really put much effort into it. Rothfuss actually takes the complete opposite approach, where he actually smoothens out the story. He smoothens out the prose extremely well. And this one is actually fun because I end up rereading this book every now and then. Maybe I'll section 5 chapters that I want to reread in an afternoon. And then I will just do that, primarily because the prose is just so fun. He's so poetic. In fact, the university section I talked about, which I don't like, eventually I kind of ended up accepting it. Why? Because, there is a lot of poetry involved. There's a lot of poetic language involved. At some point, Kvothe joins some singing competition, and he sings a very, very difficult song. I forgot the name, but technically speaking, this song is, at that point is when I realized Batik Rothfuss doesn't really give a damn. He just wants to immerse you in his world, and on top of that, he wants to have fun writing the story. That song didn't seem to, contribute a lot to the plot, but in other words, it was narratively inefficient. But then again, it was like fun to read. That's when I actually stopped worrying a lot about, narrative progression, and I just enjoyed it for what it was, which was an author trying to have fun, right? And it was extremely unique. You don't see a lot of that in fantasy nowadays, and it is fun to read. And then there is the world building that he does inside the book, because you see a lot of fantasy authors, whenever you come across a rock in their world, they will vomit out everything about that rock. But if you actually pay attention with this world and how Batik Rothfuss actually teaches you this world, what you will notice is that, guess what? He is telling you enough so that you want to know more. Okay? And this is not something I've seen a lot. George R. R. Martin does this with A Song of Ice and Fire. These two authors, they will tell you enough so that you want to know more, but not everything. They don't want to vomit everything out, and they do not vomit everything out. And Batik Rothfuss is one of those few fantasy authors that actually tells you enough to want to know more. So with this trying to be unique in the fantasy genre, how well does Batik Rothfuss achieve it? Remarkably well. In fact, so well that I have to give him a whole star for this one. Because as I read this book from the first page to the last page, it felt completely unique.
And he said, I think we all write the stories that we wish we could read. And that's what I wanted to read, is a really good story about a person, very character-centered, but not so character-centered that it just ended up being pretentious and pointless, like some of this literary fiction where the entire book is somebody drinking tea and staring out the window into the rain and thinking about their mom. No, you want interesting things, you want mythic things, but without the character, why am I even here? Why would I care if not for a good character?
And this is something else with literary fiction, where Batik Rothfuss tells the truth here. A lot of literary fiction actually ends up meandering a lot, where the character just sits around all day and we're in their head. And I think with this particular story, in fact, as he set out to achieve, he actually has a very beautiful mixture between these two things, where he has a very, very strong focus on character, but at the same time, we have this epic sort of struggle where Kvothe, the story moves along and you have a much more action-based, story. It's not going to be a literary story where the protagonist just stares out of the window all day. It's going to be a story where Kvothe is fighting dragons, is, sort of engaging in romantic tension with Denna, and it's a story where he's also trying to find the people who murdered his parents. It's a story of a lot of action, basically, yes. And I love this mixture. I love this mixture so much.
Because I studied so much of that, it enabled me to build a world that was very diverse. I mean, if you grow up and all you read is Tolkien and Shakespeare, you're not going to be able to draw on an awful lot. I get to draw on 15 years of reading fantasy novels of all sorts, and all sorts of literature, because I've read all sorts of literature.
I have said many times that world building has to have a lot of influences, that it is unique. In fact, 2 days ago, 3 days ago from your perspective, I have uploaded a video called What Makes Terrible World Building, and in that video I talk about, we don't really have to have a lot of influences from medieval Europe, and it is true. In this world, even though there is some clear influences from medieval Europe, he has a lot of influences from classical antiquity. He has influences from, behaviors that I have seen a lot in during the Umayyad Caliphates and the Ottomans as well, where you have the Adamarut, the troop. They have patrons, and these patrons are like wealthy people who sponsor them and give them protection, and in return they talk positively and sing positively of that person, right? And this is something a lot of Arabic leaders, Umara and Khulafa, they used to do this, okay, where they would hire a poet, and this poet will speak positively about them. This will be the guy they go to. And this was really fun to see in this particular story, okay? I love this influence. He has a lot of influences from East Asia. He has a lot of influences from across the world. And this is what makes good world building. Even though he doesn't really state this as his objective, he nonetheless achieves this one, and I'm going to have to give him another star for it. It's just beautiful. So what's the verdict? Well, the verdict is the following: 1 star removed for having Ambrose in this book. Ambrose didn't have to be in this book. He offered a justification for us to stay in the university. If he did not exist, the story would have moved along an interesting path that didn't really feel boring. Number 2, I have to give him a star for the prose. The prose in this story is beautiful, it is effective, it is really not something I have seen in the fantasy genre, and he does not really lose his voice. His voice is unique basically, okay? So 1 star for that. And then I have to give him 2 stars. 2 stars, why? Because as I said, there were 3 main objectives. The first one was trying to be unique and have a unique fantasy book. That's 1 star. This is 100% unique. I haven't seen any fantasy book that is like this. And then another star for having a mix between literary and fantasy, because the story is extremely character driven. It's driven by Kvothe, right? And he actually set out to achieve this, and this is why I give him a star, because he achieves this flawlessly. All right, so that's 4 out of 5. It would have been 5 if the plot was really good, okay? But the plot, it does kind of meander in the university, and that's why I remove 1 star for that. It's not efficient. It's narratively inefficient. I still got over it. Second time I reread it, I really didn't have much issue with that university section, but it still kind of, you know, vexed me a little bit, okay? So I hope you can understand that. 4 out of 5 for this book. I don't think if you really read this book once, you are going to have all of the image. I think it's good to reread it again, and then you will appreciate it 10 times more. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. I can't wait to read your comments. Have a nice day.